Hello and welcome to Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business, brought to you today by MegaPixx Media. Joining me is Anne-Marie Lurie, who is the Chief Economist with the Calgary Real Estate Board. Thanks for joining us today, Anne-Marie.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you put out a report today, sort of a mid-year report and forecast looking into the rest of the year. Let's talk a little bit, first of all, about sales. First half of the year, first 2 quarters, MLS sales in the Calgary market were 15,050, the highest in a decade. So tell me what's happening there. Like, why are we seeing such high sales and demand right now in the market?
There's really a few reasons for that. So first of all, I mean, obviously the very low interest rates have really encouraged a lot of people to get into the market at the time. And what we're really seeing is a lot of this pent up demand playing out. So, what we're talking about is really, kind of prior to the pandemic, sales activity in Calgary had been relatively low. Especially based off our population. Now, when rates came down, that really brought a lot of people back in. And that's what we're seeing play out in the market, is just that strong sales driven by really low rates and frankly, people looking to, change their housing based off of, after staying home for some time. So looking for some different places and different spaces. And now that's an opportunity for them to do so.
Yeah, and as your report says, it's a forecast of about 24,000 MLS sales for the year, best since 2014. So obviously demand continues, but obviously will slow down as it usually does in the fall and winter, right?
Yes, and we don't. So I mean, one thing that we had seen is we were hitting record levels of sales for every month, really throughout the second quarter. So we do expect that, as some of this pent up demand is really absorbed, essentially, that we're going to kind of start to see our market return to something that's a little bit more normal in terms of relative to longer term trends. But because of the strong starts in the first half of the year, we do expect, the annual numbers to be much higher than originally expected.
Okay, and when we look at prices, the benchmark price, everybody always wants to talk about prices. They always want to know what the value of their home is. So in January, the benchmark price was $492,000. In June, at the end of the quarter and the end of half the year, $537,200. So an increase there. Let me do the math. 48, whatever that is, $45,000 increase, right? What's happening with prices and why are we seeing such a hike this year?
There's a few reasons for that. First of all, I mean, we've had exceptional demand as we saw, but supply just hasn't kept pace. So what we saw happen is that, yes, listings were coming up a bit, but just not enough to meet that demand in the market. So we moved into what we kind of call that seller's market conditions, which, basically means that there's just much more demand than there is supply. And that caused some very steep price gains, especially in the detached sector. So this is what's mostly been driving it, is detached homes. This is where we've seen the most growth. And that's caused some very steep price gains. But now what we started to happen and see some shifts is that as those prices are increasing and finally recovered, let me point that out, from 2014 levels, which were our previous highs, that's also providing some opportunity for sellers as well, who potentially, haven't been able to necessarily, make some of those move ups in the market and things like that because of the weak prices over the previous 6 years.
Okay, let's talk about supply. Where's it at compared to what it should be historically, I guess?
Well, inventory, so there's a couple different measures for that. So first of all, if we think about inventory levels, it's not that they're fairly consistent with some of our longer term trends. So it's not like there hasn't been any inventory in the market, but when we put it up relative to sales, we kind of look at that months of supply number. And that's where really tells us that there hasn't necessarily been enough based off the demand. And those figures have been, well, depending on the market, detached market, I mean, we kind of saw months of supply in that 2-month range, under 2 months for, a good portion of the year. And that is a very tight market. Now we are starting to see it trend up a bit, but we're still under 3 months of supply in the city of Calgary. So that has been causing a lot of those price gains.
Okay. Well, obviously, the economy drives everything, right? And it drives the housing market. Tell me what your report says when it comes to the economy of Calgary and where we're at and where we're headed.
Well, there actually has been some positive news there as well. I mean, if we think back to earlier forecasts, the expectation was that our unemployment rates would stay in double-digit territory, and it would take some time before we start seeing improvements in our job market. Now, we did have some pullbacks earlier in this year due to further shutdowns, but what we're seeing is that some of it's still better than was originally expected. So we've seen our unemployment rate start to come down. Yes, we're not back to pre-pandemic, but we've seen growth, and not just in areas that are traditionally lower paid industries. We're seeing improvements in jobs like professional and technical services. And when I think about the implications of that, that really does hold some good news in terms of longer term outlooks for the housing market.
Okay, super then. All right. Well, thanks, Anne-Marie, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. That was Anne-Marie Lurie, who is Chief Economist with the Calgary Real Estate Board. This has been Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business and brought to you today by MegaPixx Media. Thanks for joining us.